Good morning, everybody, and I hope you had some good weeks, 3 weeks between the 2 weeks meeting that we had and had the chance to, for those that attended, to get some rest. I certainly did. It's my second day in the office, and I'm very happy to present today the outcomes of the second ExCOP meetings and Stockholm Convention COP6. And in a way, the setting of the presentation will be as follows. We go through 4 main parts. I will come to that in a bit. That talk a bit about the general setting and the organization of the meetings, and then go into a little bit of detail in the decisions taken by the COPs. For the sake of the timing, we listed the main aspects and points that were taken, so the decisions normally are much longer, and we are adding some meat to the decisions where the text wouldn't fit on the screen. And I'm also sitting here with Kay, my colleague in the Secretariat, and I will pass the floor to some subject areas that Kay is following in my presentation. And we do this just really on the spot. But let's start. The presentation today, as I mentioned, is divided in 4 parts. Part 1 on the general information about the meetings, then the second part on the outcomes of the second ExCOP meetings, part 3, and I will come to that in a bit on the cross-cutting outcomes. And then for those who have attended the meetings, are aware that we had some simultaneous sessions of the ordinary COPs, and that is a new model. So we're happy to present the outcomes of this specific new innovative approach that we took. And the 4th part is then the outcomes of the 6th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Stockholm Convention. Let us start with part 1, the general information about the meetings. And I don't want to dwell too much on it because I'm sure you're interested in hearing the outcomes of the meetings. The basic principle, the setting of the 2013 COPs and ExCOPs were divided in basically, let's say 2 parts. We had the simultaneous and back-to-back meetings of the COPs. So we had ExCOPs and the normal COPs back-to-back, basically sort of like in a sandwich, the ExCOPs at the beginning and the end, in between the COPs of the 3 conventions. We had the individual COPs dealing with specific issues, taking into account a specific setting or a special setting that we choose for the meetings, and the ExCOPs considering synergies matters. In total, the COPs and the ExCOPs adopted a series of 50 decisions. The presidents have been Osvaldo Alvarez Perez from Chile for the Stockholm Convention, Ms. Magdalena Balica from Poland for the Rotterdam Convention, and Mr. Franz Perez from Switzerland for the Basel Convention. A little bit on the stats. In total, we had 1,271 participants from 172 parties. And I think that's remarkable, noting that Basel Convention has currently 180 parties, 179 for Stockholm and 153 for the Rotterdam Convention. So it was really a very well-attended meeting. That was also thanks to the generous support of participants' travel that allowed the Secretariat to fund almost all participants that requested funding. We also had for the high-level segment a total of 82 ministers from 73 countries. So from that point of view, it was the largest meeting that the Secretariat undertook, and saw the participation of 1,270. Just to repeat, it was quite impressive number. For those that have participated, are quite familiar with the schedule of the 2 weeks. Just for a recap, we had the ExCOPs, as I mentioned, basically being at the beginning, and it is not shown here on that slide, but also at the end, considering then the adoption of the ExCOP decisions. So a little bit in a way you can say it's a sandwich of the ExCOPs, then encompassing the individual COPs. And now you see on Monday 29 April and on Sunday 28 April in the afternoon that specific news setting that the Bureau, together with the COP presidents, choose for this meeting, which were simultaneous sessions of the ordinary meetings of the COPs. That followed by 3 days of Stockholm COP6, 3 days of Basel Convention COP11, and then 2.5 days of Rotterdam Convention COP6. We also, at the last day, had a high-level segment, including ministerial round tables. At the end of the day on Friday, 10 May, the COPs adopted the decisions and closed all the meetings. That's the basic setting that we had during the 2 weeks. I think it's important just to note the simultaneous sessions and how they were set up. And the basic principle is to take advantage of basically 3 conventions sitting together in one single room, taking advantage of the knowledge and expertise of each of these conventions, being able to contribute to the discussions under the specific conventions, and in advance of the meetings, with a couple of or several topics being identified that would benefit from these joint discussions. These were technical assistance and financial resources. These were relevant under all 3 conventions: reporting under the Basel and Stockholm conventions, POPs waste under the Basel and Stockholm convention, and finally compliance under the 3 conventions. As I just said, the discussion we're aiming at focusing on lessons learned and best practices and common issues under the 3 conventions. It has to be noted that despite that this new setting of the simultaneous sessions of the ordinary COPs, of course there were many convention-specific issues that were discussed separately and within the framework of their back-to-back sequential COP meetings. Also to note, in order to ensure the legal autonomy of the 3 conventions, all decisions were taken separately by the individual COPs. I would like to now come to the outcomes of the second ExCOP. In principle, the second ExCOPs meetings adopted in what we call an omnibus decision that consists of 7 parts. And I would like to start with the first part, which focuses on review arrangements. The review arrangements, in principle, followed up on recommendations set out in reports prepared by the Secretariat itself and by UNEP and FAO. So these were the basis of the discussion. And the ExCOPs decided to take these recommendations, which are set out in the annex to this decision, as a basis for follow-up of several actors. On one side, the Executive Secretary, but UNEP FAO, but also other stakeholders. In order to advance the review process, the ExCOPs also decided to further review the synergies arrangement in 2017, based on, again, independent assessments of the implementation and the impact on joint activities, as well as joint managerial functions. And the methodology of this review, including the draft terms of references, will be prepared for considerations of the next COPs that will be held in 2015. The second part deals with the organization of the secretariats. The COP here, this is not pointed out on the bullet points, took notes of the progress made through the joint activities. The secretaries implemented a series of joint activities that were part of the work program in excuse me now. I was a little bit too quick. This is on the organization of the Secretariat. I will come back to that joint activities in a bit. Basically, for the organization of the Secretariat, the ExCOPs endorsed the matrix-based management approach and the organization of the Secretariats as it is right now, and asked the unit executive director to undertake a review of the organization operation of the Secretariat and report to the COPs in 2017. So basically, there's now a time frame of 4 years to implement the decisions and the matrix-based structure. And now let me go to joint activities. Apologies, I was a bit too quick. On the joint activities, the COP took note of the progress made through these activities. And it is important to note that those joint activities were basically at the last program of work, separate activities that were listed as part of decision. The Secretariat for this series and COPs for the next biennium took a stance that joint activities are now integral part of the program of work activities. I think it's important to note because if you see the work program, the related document did not list any activities which were listed as part of the activities under the three convention. It is also important to note that this approach to basically integrate the joint activities in the program of works was well taken up by the COPs, and the Secretariat is requested to continue with this approach. And as one of the main outcomes, as you see on the slide here, the Secretariat has been requested to report on the implementation of these activities and to identify possible future joint activities by 2013 for the next round of COPs. Then the section 4 deals with enhanced cooperation and coordination between the technical bodies, and I will come to that later on. We have specific decisions under the conventions that take up these points that were taken and decisions taken by the ExCOPs. First, the ExCOPs requested that the working arrangements of the Chemicals Review Committee under the Rotterdam Conventions and the POPs Review Committee under the Stockholm Convention are to be aligned to allow for mutual information sharing and effective participation of experts and observers at the committee meetings. It also requested to develop guidance to assist parties to the Rotterdam Convention and the CRC in the work related to POPs chemicals. Finally, it also encouraged the POPROC to involve experts from the Basel Convention when discussing waste-related matters. I will now move on to section 5 on wider cooperation. Not on the slide, but important to note, the COPs also took a stance and looked into paragraphs 89 and 213 to 223 of the Rio +20 outcomes, the future we want. So I think here that is the basis for that decision on wider cooperation. Also, the Secretariat has been requested in the framework of that decision to further enhance cooperation and coordination with SAICM, and that with a view to contribute to meeting the 2020 goals on the sound management of chemicals and waste. The ExCOPs also expressed their interest and signaled readiness to cooperate and coordinate with the future Minamata Convention on mercury, an important signal given, and also invited the conference of the plenipotentiaries of the Minamata Convention later this year to consider cooperation and coordination with the existing 3 chemicals and waste conventions. Number 6 on the omnibus decision on transparency accountability. The basis for that decision was a decision by the Executive Secretary to post on the website of the free convention, the Synergy website, a series of reports. I will not go into detail. In principle, the COPs welcomed the practice of posting those reports on the Synergy website and welcomed the progress made by the ES, by the Executive Secretary, in improving transparency and accountability. It also mentioned to continue posting the existing reports and, in addition, some additional ones that would also include, for instance, the work program of the Secretariat. This all is posted on the Synergy's website, and we will provide later on at the end of this presentation a link to it. The last part, and that was a long discussion in the Financial Resources and Technical Assistance Contact Group. The last part is dealing with facilitating financial resources for chemicals and waste. And again, I'd like to give a little bit of a background on the discussions that took place. The discussions were circling around a decision taken by the Governing Council of UNEP earlier this year. To be more precise, this is decision 2712 of the Governing Council, and particularly here section 11 on the consultative process on financing options for chemicals and wastes. And the COPs joined the Governing Council in welcoming an integrated approach to financing chemicals and wastes. And I think it's important to mention, because here you see later on the bullet points take reference to this integrated approach, and it is possibly really important to note what this consists of. And this integrated approach consists of three mutually reinforcing tracks, which are mainstreaming, industry involvement, and dedicated external finance. The COP for this decision invited all countries, in particular developed countries, to further strengthen dedicated external financing, which is the first track. So you will see later on references to the other two tracks, and noted also with appreciation the invitation to the GEF to revise in its sixth replenishment, which is now upcoming, to revise its focal area structure and strategy to address not only chemicals but also waste in a broader sense. It also requested the Executive Secretary to ensure that the Secretariat's activities and support to parties under the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Convention take reference of this integrated approach. Then the ExCOPs also emphasize that institutional strengthening requires attention at a national level, and I think that is important also to note, to go back to the Governing Council decision, which asks for the convening of a meeting to decide terms of reference for a special program. And of course, many of you heard the notion of national units falling under this activities that this special program will look at. However, institutional strengthening is the common knowledge or the common wording that the ExCOPs agreed on. But in late August, there will be a meeting that will further look into the topic of institutional strengthening, particularly at the national level. The ExCOP also invited party to further mainstream sound management of chemicals in national development plans. So here we go back to the first track of the integrated approach, and also further encourage industry involvement as set out in the integrated approach. Then finally, under that decision, it is important to note that that implementation at a regional level, including through regional center, could be strengthened also through the implementation of that approach. With this, I leave the second part. I will now move to part number 3 on cross-cutting outcomes of the 3 ordinary meetings. And here, I would like to mention just on a few bullet points what these entail. So the cross-cutting outcome out of these ordinary sessions of the three COPs dealt with the budget and programs of work, which have been adopted as part of the individual COPs. Then on a process for the development of MOUs between UNEP and the three COPs. This is ongoing, and the next round of COPs will continue looking into this issue. Furthermore, on the harmonization of processes and format for admission of observers, also the harmonization of forms for notification and designation of contact points, and of course then for the next round of COPs, the three COPs took decisions in a harmonized way to hold those meetings back-to-back in Geneva. There will be no high-level segment and no extraordinary sessions of the COPs. Joint sessions, simultaneous sessions as presented before, can be put into place where appropriate, again on possible joint issues. And there will be a series of regional meetings to assist preparations. On the technical assistance side, this is a cross-cutting outcome that was discussed in the contact group. A methodology for evaluating Basel, Stockholm, and regional centers were adopted. One new Stockholm regional center were endorsed. This is the SCRC in Jakarta. The 8 Stockholm regional centers were endorsed for a second period of 2 years, and all centers then are to be evaluated at COP7 for every 4 years thereafter. Then also for first time, the BC regional centers will be evaluated at the next COP, COP12, with the same methodology adopted for the Stockholm Convention centers. Also, information to be provided on needs and availability of technical assistance and technology transfer for the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions were asked to be provided as usual by parties, and the Stockholm Convention will, the Secretariat will contact parties in due course. It also took note of the harmonized technical assistance program for all three conventions. On this here, just a quick slide on how this looks like. This consists of partnership, the program for all three conventions, regional centers, capacity building and training, and needs assessment. On the financial resources side, the Stockholm Convention, in a harmonized discussion involving all three conventions, took on specific decisions on the Stockholm Convention. These were consolidated guidance. The needs assessment for the period 2015 and 19, which has been adopted. Also the third review of the financial mechanism, which is the CHEF. All of these decisions are to be transmitted to the CHEF for consideration of the sixth replenishment of its trust fund. And then for the other two conventions, in principle, which is not part of the slides here, but in principle, the decisions for Rotterdam and Basel Convention on Financial Resources stress the need to continue ensuring sustainable financing for the implementation of these two conventions, and more specifically requested the Secretariat to continue its collaboration with relevant partners. This includes the CHEF and the IMC organizations, with a view to ensure that also the relevant provisions of the Rotterdam and Basel Conventions are taken into account in technical assistance projects and activities. On national reporting, the Stockholm Convention, under the Stockholm Convention, the COP revised the reporting format which was adopted, and also to include HBCD to be included, and in this format, so the format needs to be updated. Under the Basel Convention, parties are requested to transmit questionnaires information for 2011 and previous year, and also to fill in data gaps for 2006 and the following years. Also, a process for reviewing the formats has been established, the Secretariat will develop new electronic reporting system. A small intersessional working group has been set up. Nominations are to be sent in by 30 June 2013, including a lead country, to develop the revised format, which are to be considered at OEWG 9, and parties are requested to submit suggestions by 30 September 2013. On the POPs waste guidelines, I will be quite short because I would like to pass the floor to my colleague Kay. There were several decisions taken on the POPs waste guidelines with a mandate of the smaller sessional working group to monitor and assist in the review, updating of the waste guidelines. Also, there's a process established for the revision of other specific guidelines, and an invitation were set up for the Stockholm COP6 to update technical guidelines to include HBCD. But I will pass the floor to Kay now to provide some more meat to this set of decisions.
Thank you, Frank. Yes, I would like to add a little bit about this simultaneous session on the scientific activities. The first is for the national around the national reporting discussion. The plenary discussion was built on how it would be possible to cooperate and see the opportunity to increase the submission rate of national reporting under the Basel Convention and also the Stockholm Convention. Where is the possibility to facilitate parties in submitting the reporting for those two conventions? This was the first opportunity for the two conventions to discuss together in the plenary and further take the decision in more harmonized manner. The decisions on reporting for the Basel and Stockholm Conventions were taken in the during the specific convention COPs during the later week, but having this discussion in the beginning was found to be very useful by the parties. Similarly, for the POPs waste, these items were discussed together during the simultaneous session because there were several areas possible to cooperate between the Basel Convention and the Stockholm Convention. The parties indicated that it is important for both conventions to share the expertise on the waste issues and also the specific chemicals that the convention's experts have been looked at. So for the POPs waste guidelines, the Basel Convention took decision to include hexabromocyclododecane in the next round of revising the technical guidelines on the POPs waste. Specifically under the brominated flame retardant related guidelines, which has already been understood that the penta-BTE and octa-BTE that were already listed under the Stockholm Convention at COP5, the same group would also look at hexabromocyclododecane in this same guidelines. And this kind of cooperation was possible because of the simultaneous session took consideration on the POPs waste at the same time in plenary, and later during the 2 weeks took decision in each of the convention COPs. I will now return the microphone to Frank.
Thank you, Kay, for this presentation. Am I online again? Good. Thanks, Kay, again. And now we will move on to the last part of these ordinary session, cross-cutting outcomes, which is compliance. And we start with the Basel Convention work because that had a more, let's say, a more workload outcome, because since it has already a set up structure here for Basel Convention, the COP adopted recommendation from the Implementation and Compliance Committee, not to go too much into detail, but that is dealing with, for instance, national reporting and the revision of certain guidance documents. Also, the program of work for the ICC for 2014 and 15 was approved, and also the terms of reference for the environmental network for optimizing regulatory compliance on illegal traffic with a nicer acronym, and FORCE, were adopted. Unfortunately, of course, for those who had been there, have witnessed that there were no advancements on the decisions on a compliance mechanism and procedures under the Stockholm and Rotterdam Convention. The outcomes of the Stockholm Convention COP6 work are to be further considered. The next COP, the same decisions were taken for the Rotterdam Convention. That is the end of the third part, and bear with me now. It comes to the fourth and last part of this presentation on the outcomes of the sixth meeting of the Conference of the Parties to the Stockholm Convention. In principle, the really big decision taken by the Stockholm COP was another addition of a chemical, hexabromocyclododecane. We listed an Annex A with specific exemptions. This is an amendment to the convention, and shows that the convention is alive and is growing. The next topic on the effectiveness of evaluation, and as I mentioned before, the decisions are longer. We just choose to present the highlights here. On the effectiveness evaluation, the COP adopted a framework and a committee composed of 14 members to continue its work. Then on BDEs and PFOS, the COP adopted a process for the evaluation of the continued need for specific exemption and acceptable purposes for these two substance groups. And for that, a small intersessional working group was established to review information collection format on BDEs. Here, nominations are to be sent to the Secretariat by 30 June 2013, again including a lead country. It also encouraged parties to implement relevant POPROC recommendations on PFOS alternatives in open applications. On the topic of DDT, the main conclusions of the COP was that DDT may still be needed in some countries. The COP also took note of the POPROC assessment on alternatives and invited UNEP in consultation with the WHO, the DDT expert group and the Secretariat to prepare a roadmap for the development of DDT alternatives. Then on the subject of BAD&BEP, the COPs adopted a work plan for the BAD&BEP expert group and forwarded the waste-related content of the BAD&BEP guidance for new POPs to relevant bodies of the Basel Convention. Finally, on the NIPS, it encouraged parties to use updated guidance or additional guidance on NIP update when revising and updating their national implementation plans. Then on an important topic on the POPs Review Committee, decided that POP ROC 9 are to be held back-to-back, and then coming back to the decisions of the ExCOPs in the omnibus decision on the harmonization of the work of these two technical bodies, decided that POP ROC 9 are to be held back-to-back with the Rotterdam Convention Chemicals Review Committee, also the 9th session from 14th to 25 October 2013 in Rome with a joint session. It also asked to evaluate the experience of the benefits gained of these back-to-back meetings and asked for these evaluations to be presented at the ExCOPs. Also, 17 parties were identified to be new members for the POPROC. And on the question of the interim chair, this is to be identified by POPROC 9. This person has to, or is to start chairing at POPROC 10, which is to be confirmed by COP 7. I would like to pass now the floor to my colleague Kay, who has been heavily involved in these parts, but not just let me quickly slide to the next part, because there is also a part on endosylfan, which the COP took note of the POPROC reports on endosylfan chemical and non-chemical alternatives. I just wanted to add this bullet point because it is important. So with this, I would like to provide Kay with the opportunity to add some more meat to these decisions. Kay.
Thank you very much, Frank. So the meeting of the POPs Review Committee. The meeting of the POPs Review Committee will be held from 14 to 18 October in Rome. Sorry, thank you very much. There are many technical experts in this room helping us delivering the webinar. And the joint session will be held in between the Chemical Review Committee. The Secretariat is now trying to identify the best date for the joint session and will be informed as soon as decided. In relation to the decision that was taken by the Synergies Omnibus decision, where the POPs Review Committee and the Chemical Review Committee were requested to look at the working arrangement and how to enhance the cooperation between the two committees. This kind of thing will be discussed during these 2 weeks of period of the back-to-back meeting of POPROC and CRC. As Frank has mentioned that the chair of the committee hasn't been identified at the moment yet for the next round. It will be discussed during the POPROC 9 meeting. Some of the important issues to be discussed during the 9th meeting will be the chemicals under consideration. At the COP, the chemicals that was recommended by the POPROC was listed as recommended, hexabromocyclododecan in Annex A with specific exemptions for expanded polystyrene and extruded polystyrene in buildings. There was also an additional section to insert definition for hexabromocyclododecan in Part 3 of Annex A, and also Part 7 called hexabromocyclododecan to indicate the importance of identification of the hexabromocyclododecan by labeling or other means throughout its life cycle. There were a lot of discussion during the plenary and also at the contact group how best to indicate this identification and labeling of hexabromocyclododecan and ensure it throughout its life cycle. And this is addressed in Part 7 of Annex A. Other chemicals under consideration by the POPs Review Committee are chlorinated naphthalene, hexachlorobutadiene. Those are risk management evaluation stage and will be reviewed at POPROC 9. The pentachlorophenol and its salts and esters is a risk profile stage, and other chemicals proposed for inclusion will also be discussed. In terms of technical work by the POPROC, as mentioned by Frank, that the COP gave mandate to the POPROC to develop terms of reference for the assessment of alternatives to PFOS salt and PFOS-F. So the terms of reference will be prepared at POPROC 9 so that the POPROC 10 can undertake the assessment for report at COP 7. Other issues are like Annex E criteria, guidance to climate change and POPs, and also alternatives to PFOS guidance documents. There will be another separate session on POPROC and CRC webinar to provide more background information for you to be prepared for the discussion at the meetings. So please take note of the schedule of the webinars in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. I will now continue with the presentation, and we left the presentation on the slide, and I will now move to the topic of the toolkit. The COP welcomed the revised toolkit and recommended its use, and also asked toolkit experts and the Secretariat to contribute to training activities. I see my video is now switched on. Then, to continue, on the global monitoring plan, the COP welcomed updated guidance on the plan, and also welcomed results of the first phase of the human milk survey. I will now come to the last slide of the first part of the presentation. We will then go into a section of questions and answers. On the topic of exemptions, the COP adopted a form for notification of specific exemptions of endosulfan, and then procedure under para 2b of Article 3. The COP adopted a template for certification of non-party imports. Then also an important topic, of course, the implementation of the obligations with regard to polychlorinated biphenyls. The COP asked the Secretariat to prepare a report on the progress towards the elimination of PCBs, and this will be evaluated at COP 7, so at the next COPs. The final point on institutional arrangements, 5 members of the Bureau are requested to participate in the joint Bureau meetings of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm conventions. With this, I am at the end of my presentation. I thank you for your attention, and we will now move into the small section on question and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank Moser, for your great presentation. Now we are in a discussion session. I've received the first question from Katarina. The question goes like, regarding Stockholm Convention and HBCD, I'd like to know if there is any estimation on a timeline. When can we expect the depository?
Thank you for the question. The Secretariat will do our best as soon as possible to communicate the decision taken by the COP in 6 languages to the depository, and then the depository will communicate that adopted decision to all parties. So for example, at COP 4, there were 9 chemicals adopted in May 2009. The decisions compiling those 9 chemicals in 6 languages were communicated by the depository to parties on 26th of August. So it took from May, June, July, and August about 4 months to prepare that. Whereas at COP5, it was only one chemical, endosulfan, but there were some issues in the translation which took a bit longer than it happened at COP4. So after COP5, which took place in 2011 May, the communication was made by the depository in October 2011. This time it's hexabromocyclododecan, only one chemical. So we will do our best again. Which means that the estimated time is around August or October of this year. We should not be later than October. We will do our best to communicate with the depository as soon as possible. There is a website of the UN treaty section where you can find this information. I can send the link to participants if you are interested, so that you can monitor whether the communication was sent to official contact points of the parties or not. You can also look at the parties, the countries that are parties to the Stockholm Convention, and including the status of ratification of new chemicals if the parties have made declaration that it needs ratification in order to be part of the newly listed chemicals. So I'll be able to send the link to this UN treaty section of the Stockholm Convention.
Thank you very much, Kay. And now we are in a question and answer session. You can ask a question either raising your hand or giving us your question through the chat message. Okay, I received another question from Mary Ann. The question is that, could I please check on the duration of the 2015 back-to-back COPs?
Thank you for the question. According to the approved budget, the duration that is possible to hold in Geneva is for 12 days. The Secretariat is in consultation with the Bureau. The Secretariat was requested in consultation with Bureau to look at the best approach for holding the back-to-back COPs, including the duration and how to get organized, especially in terms of when to address joint issues in joint sessions. So in terms of budget, it's the 12 days that is available for funding and also to organize logistics. Thank you.
Thank you. And there's another question from Darren. When will work commence on establishing an effectiveness and evaluation committee?
Thank you for the question. I think the effectiveness evaluation decision is on, hold on a minute. the effectiveness evaluation had adopted the framework for the evaluation, and it will be establishing the group starting from the not this at this intersessional period, but after the COP7. The framework that is revised during the meeting is contained in document 27, Ad 1, Rev 1, and there were a lot of discussions on how many people needs to be nominated for this group. But you can have a look at that document in this revised framework that was adopted. So it's not during this during the intersessional period.
Thank you, Kay. There's another question from Eloise Tony. On the national reporting on slide 21, is there a review of the reporting format only for the BC, or will the SIWG or OEWG develop a new electronic reporting system for all three conventions?
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, for the Basel Convention, there was the small intersessional working group set up by the decision, and will be looking at the revision of the format, simplifying, and so that more parties will be able to submit the reporting format. The reporting by the parties will be increased. Whereas for the Stockholm Convention, there's no small intersessional working group established, but the Secretariat was requested to include hexabromocyclododecan in the report, and also continue to not to change in substantive way, but to make the user friendliness of the reporting be more improved, and provide assistance for parties so that the national reporting submission will be facilitated. There's no reporting for Rotterdam Convention, so it's only for the Basel and the Stockholm Convention. Thank you.
Thank you. And there's another question from Boson Oladimeji. Is there any deadline for the NIP update as regards the endorser fund that was included in 2011? And what about the HBCD that was added last month?
Well, according to Article 7, the deadline for submission of national reporting is 2 years from the date of entry into force. So for the 9 chemicals which entered into force for most parties in 2010, August 26, the deadline for updating the NIP to include the 9 chemicals was 2012, August. To include endosulfan was also 2 years after the date of entry into force for endosulfan, which is for most of the parties, it's 2012 October, which means that the deadline is 2014 October. For the hexabromocyclododecan, it was listed, but it hasn't been entered into force for any parties yet. The entry into force for most of the parties is 1 year after the date of communication by the depository. So if the depository can communicate in some time before the autumn of this year, then the deadline will be 2017 of the fall. So it's the date of entry into force will be in 2016. So the deadline will be in 2018. No, what am I saying? I'm so sorry. This year is 2013. So the date of entry into force will be in 2014. And the deadline for submission of the national implementation will be for the hexabromocyclododecan will be 2016. I hope this was clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kei Ono. Okay, if you have more questions, please ask through the chat message. And now I'll pass the floor to Kei for the second presentation.
Thank you very much. So my presentation will be on the Basel Convention's COP11 outcome and the Rotterdam Convention's COP6 outcome. And then I will also provide information about high-level segment outcome and the follow-up to the meetings. The first slide has a lot of text, but this covers the outcome of one decision, which is on follow-up to the Indonesian Swiss country-led initiative to improve the effectiveness of the Basel Convention. This decision has three parts. The first part is about addressing the entry into force of the ban amendment, where the Conference of the Parties took note of the communication from the United Nations Office of Legal Affairs and acknowledged the ratification of the amendment. The second part is environmentally sound management guidelines development. The COP adopted the framework, which was included in document number 3, add 1, and it will be issued as Rev 1 on the website as adopted by the COP. Then the COP recommended the list of actions for parties, regional centers, and other stakeholders to take. The list of actions are included in the annex to this decision. The COP decided to mandate an expert working group to further elaborate and implement actions on initial short-term work as following the mandate given in Annex 2 to the decision. And then in order for the expert working group to get started, it was decided that the parties to nominate 5 regional groups representation to participate in this group. Each regional group is to nominate through the Bureau by 30th of June the 5 members who will be participating in this group to be communicated to the Secretariat. The group is also open to observers. And this work will be presented at OEWG 9 and possible adoption by the 12th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. The third part of this decision is on legal clarity. The COP took note of the report on the interpretation of certain terminology and of the study on used and end-of-life goods. With regard to the glossary of terms, the COP established a small intersessional working group to complete the glossary of terms. So the small intersessional working group again needs to be established. The nomination needs to be communicated to the Secretariat by 30th of June 2013. Also, the parties are invited to consider themselves as a lead country, and this also has to be communicated to the Secretariat by 30th of June. So this was the first decision adopted by the Conference of the Parties. The next set of decisions presented on these slides are technical guidelines on e-waste and on mercury waste. And of course, I have mentioned earlier another decision on POPs waste. So with regard to POPs waste, as I have mentioned, there are already the small intersessional working group chaired by Canada and also other specific work guidelines led by several other countries and organizations like China on the brominated flame retardants, Japan on PCB, PBB, and HBB, FAO on the pesticides, and UNEP chemicals on dioxins and pentachlorobenzene. So this is ongoing work on the POPs waste guidelines decision, and in addition, the new work was mandated under mercury waste decision. So the small intersessional working group was mandated to work on the environmental sound management of wastes consisting of elemental mercury and waste containing or contaminated with mercury. This will be presented at the 9th meeting of the open-ended working group. The small intersessional working group, the lead country was invited by the decision. Japan has indicated its interest in taking the lead of this group. For the e-waste, the guidelines was not adopted during the meeting, but the small intersessional working group was mandated to revise the draft technical guidelines. The deadline indicated in the decision is 30th of November 2013 for comments, for further submission to the 9th meeting of the open-ended working group. In a related item, the decision on PACE, the partnership for action on computing equipment, the guidance document was adopted, except for the section number 3, which has overlap of the e-waste technical guidelines elements. So the document number 6, pre-session document number 6, add 1, will be issued as Rev 1 as adopted by the Conference of the Parties. The mandate for the PACE working group was extended until the end of 2015 to complete its work. The work program is annexed to this decision. For example, continue to hold training workshops on technical guidelines in the regions, continue pilot projects on the collection and the management of used and end-of-life computing equipment, and so on. Another scientific and technical related item was on amendments to Annex 9 of the Convention. There were 2 new entries adopted by this decision. Decision number 6. Those are the entry B3026 and B3027. Another entry regarding B3025 would require further work, so this was decided to be included in the work program of open-ended working group. So parties and others are invited to submit comments by the 30th of October, and it will be considered at the 9th meeting of the open-ended working group. Another item in the slide, this is not related to scientific and technical matters, but more of the institutional matter. It was a very short decision, but what the COP decided was to discontinue the bureau, the expanded bureau, decides to discontinue the expanded bureau as a subsidiary body of the convention. And the COP also decided that any function previously entrusted to the expanded bureau shall be undertaken in the future by the Bureau of the Conference of the Parties. And then finally, it decided that 5 members of the Bureau may participate in the joint Bureau meetings of the Conference of the Parties of the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Conventions, having due regard to the principle of equitable geographical representation of the 5 regions. So to reflect these decisions, the Rule 21 of the Rules of Procedure was amended, and this was also one of the decisions adopted by the Conference of the Parties. So the work program of the open-ended working group was adopted. The Secretariat was entrusted to reflect all the decisions that has implication or indication of the open-ended working group's work to be included in the work program. Those include the first matter, it's strategic issues. For strategic framework, there is the activity to consider the baseline reports submitted by the Secretariat. Another related to Cartagena Declaration. The activity is to prepare a roadmap for action and review the progress. And developing guidelines for environmental sound management is to consider the report on activities and work program of the expert working group on the framework. And directly related to the decision by the open-ended working group was to consider the options for operation of the open-ended working group. The Secretariat was requested to prepare an analysis for possible options in terms of institutional arrangements, including the financial implications. So it was discussed during the COP11 whether the open-ended working group needs to be reformed as a smaller committee type of organization, or it should continue the same modus operandi. And the decision of the open-ended working group indicates that the Secretariat should analyze more of the options and the implications of the changing in the operation modality. It will be discussed at the OEWG9, and then the outcome of OEWG9 will be submitted for further consideration at the 12th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. For scientific and technical matters, there's as mentioned earlier, the work related to POPs waste guidelines and the work related to mercury waste guidelines, and further develop the technical guidelines on e-waste. The national reporting also has one work by the open-ended working group, review and revise the draft reporting format. And then relating to amendments to the annexes to the convention, to consider and review application for changes and any corrections to the list of waste in annexes 8 and 9. Also consider the amendment of the entries in Annex 8 to Basel Convention for polychlorinated dibenzofurans and polychlorinated dibenzodioxins, DDT, and other relevant POPs. And then, of course, to consider the draft entry of B3025. Classification and hazard characterization of wastes. Although there was no decision taken by the COP 11, the mandate was continued from the 10th meeting of the Basel Convention. So the open-ended working group will provide guidance on the identification of waste in the World Customs Organization Harmonized Commodity Description and Coding System. For legal, governance, and enforcement matters, there is the consultation with the ICC, the Committee for Administering the Mechanism for Promoting Implementation and Compliance of the Committee. There's a work program adapted for this committee. Another one related to legal is providing further legal clarity for CLI to finalize the glossary of terms. Then another section relating to international cooperation and coordination. The first one is Basel Convention Partnership Program. This is to consider the report of the PACE. Another one is environmentally sound dismantling of ships, is to consider the report of the Secretariat on the programs for sustainable ship recycling. Then for other international cooperation and coordination, this item also, the COP did not take specific decision at COP 11, but the mandate continued from the last COP, COP 10. So it is to provide guidance to the Secretariat on means of enhancing cooperation and coordination with international and regional organizations. Finally, it's the program of work and budget, so financing and budget for the biennium 2014 and 2015. Requested the open-ended working group to consider the reports by the Secretariat on all sources of income received, including the reserve and fund balances and interest, together with actual provisional and projected expenditures and commitments, and by executive secretary on all expenditures against the agreed budget lines. So this will be part of the agenda items of the open-ended working group in September. The ninth meeting of the open-ended working group, the date hasn't been confirmed yet, but it will most likely in September 2014. The budget approved for the organization of this meeting was 4 days duration with 2 days of interpretation. The 2 days of meeting without interpretation will be technical meetings, more like contact group meetings to discuss certain specific issues that are already on the table. This is the last slide of the Basel Convention outcome. Other decisions taken by the COP includes the one relating to the strategic framework. It was to the process for finalizing the baseline and developing the midterm evaluation under the strategic framework was agreed, and the information was invited for submission by 30th of September. Another decision relating to resource mobilization, it requested the Secretariat to continue cooperation. Next one is on IMO. The Secretariat has to continue cooperation with IMO and develop a guidance on sea-land interface. Then the decision relating to emergency trust fund. The procedure is provided in this decision on the emergency trust fund. With regard to environmentally sound dismantling of ships, the Secretariat was requested to develop further the programs for sustainable ship recycling with IMO and ILO. Then finally, for combat illegal traffic, the decision requested the Secretariat to undertake activities for preventing illegal traffic. Now I would like to move on to the Rotterdam Convention outcome. The Rotterdam Convention COP was the last COP of the 3 conventions. In the first few days of this Rotterdam COP, the chemicals for listing in Annex 3 were considered, and 4 chemicals were listed: azynphos methyl pesticide, commercial pentabromodiphenyl ether, industrial chemical, commercial octabromodiphenyl ether, and perfluorooctane sulfonic acid, perfluorooctane sulfonates, perfluorooctane sulfonamides, and perfluorooctane sulfonyls. Those are also industrial chemicals. Azynphos methyl was adopted as presented in the precession documents, and the penta and octa BDEs were adopted with additional CAS numbers indicated in the decision text. For the PFOS, there were 11 CAS numbers identified to accompany the listing of the perfluorooctane sulfonic acid. Those CAS numbers were identified from the database of the notification of framework submitted by parties. So if you are interested in where those CAS numbers come from, I can also provide a link to the website where you can find the original of the documents with CAS numbers and the chemical names provided. As you can see, the sulfonates, couple of sulfonates were listed, and a couple of sulfonamides were listed, and one sulfonyl fluoride was listed. So those were listed as part of this main entry of the chemicals: perfluorooctane sulfonic acid, sulfonates, sulfonamides, and sulfonyls, including, and have all these examples listed with CAS numbers. The decision guidance documents that were put forward by the Chemical Review Committee were all adopted for each chemical. Two other chemicals that were considered by the COP but not adopted in this meeting were chrysotile asbestos, the industrial chemical, and liquid formulations, emulsifiable concentrate and soluble concentrate containing paraquat dichloride at or above 276 grams per liter. For paraquat, the COP took decision indicating that the requirements set out in Article 6 of the Convention, including the criteria set out in Part 3 of Annex 4 to the Convention, the requirements set out in Paragraph 1 of Article 7, and the requirements set out in the first sentence of Paragraph 2 of Article 7 have all been met. So it has decided that all the criteria have been met, but because there was no consensus so far has created concerning this chemical, so it was decided that the agenda for its next ordinary meeting shall include further consideration of a draft decision to amend Annex 3 to the Convention to include this chemical. So similar decision has taken for chrysotile asbestos at COP3 of the Rotterdam Convention, and there has been no consensus on this chemical yet. So those two chemicals will be considered at the 7th meeting of the Conference of the Parties in 2015. The next decision to introduce is on Chemical Review Committee. Similar to the decision on POPs Review Committee, the Conference of the Parties approved the back-to-back meeting with one-day joint session in Rome. So this meeting will take place after the POPs Review Committee in October 2013. Joint session will take place before the Chemical Review Committee. And the COP also requested that the experiences gained during the back-to-back meetings should be reported back at COP7, and then further consider the organization of the two committee meetings. Because the Chemical Review Committee's meeting was moved from March, as originally scheduled, to October, there was a need to extend the terms of office of the members. So in order to make sure that they have enough time to participate in the intersessional period and also during the meeting. So the terms of office was extended until May, which is now harmonized with the rotation schedule of the POPs Review Committee. With regard to the chair of the committee, similar to POPs Review Committee, the chair of the next for the next term hasn't been identified, so it needs to be as an interim chair identified at CRC 9, and acting basis it will chair the CRC 10, and confirmation will be done at 7th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. Two decisions were taken with regard to the implementation of the Rotterdam Convention. So the parties were reminded about the obligations to submit the notifications. The exporting and importing parties were requested to fully implement Article 12 of the Convention and send export notification and acknowledge the receipts and so on. Another is on exchanging information on exports and export notifications. The Secretariat was requested to prepare a questionnaire for the collection of the information. So once the questionnaire is ready, there will be request for submission of the information relating to exports and export notification. So that was it for the Rotterdam Convention's decision. Just for your information, the Basel Convention took 26 decisions. The Stockholm Convention took 30 decisions. And the Rotterdam Convention took 16 decisions. Some of the decisions are almost identical or very much harmonized. For example, the cross-cutting issues like official communications, admission of observers, and financing of budget for the biennium. The budget has the exact same tables except for the assessed contribution table for the three convention decisions. Another almost identical decisions is the one on venue and date of the next meetings, which indicates the 2015 back-to-back organization of the three convention Conference of the Parties. So those were about the three conventions Conference of the Parties outcome. Now I would like to move on to high-level segment outcome. The theme of the high-level segment was synergies and the implementation of the chemicals and waste conventions at the national, regional, and global levels. It was organized from the 9th to the 10th of May, starting with opening speeches and then moving right into roundtable discussions. There were over 80 ministers and vice ministers met in 9 panels to answer specific questions prepared by the Secretariat. Other related events, there were a ceremony on the ban amendment and ministerial dinner. Geneva Statement on the sound management of chemicals and waste was also adopted during the high-level segment. The next couple of slides indicate key messages from the high-level segment. The outcome of the high-level segment is summarized as a report, and it's available on the website. So I would like to encourage you to download the report of the high-level segment, so you can read the full sentences of the messages. But these messages indicated in those slides are also give you some clear pictures of what were discussed during the roundtable discussion. The one on synergies, they all agreed that synergies is a continuing process, implying coherence in the environmental and developmental agenda, and should encompass all sectors and be an incentive to set up national committees to manage chemicals and hazardous waste, and lead to resource mobilization for encouraging green industry. It was also stressed that business community should be allies in the synergy process, and the regional cooperation, the strengthened regional cooperation was underscored to be fostering exchanges of ideas and discussion of problems and sharing of good practices. the momentum created by the Joint Secretariat should be harnessed to encourage countries to join the conventions. The long-term needs and delivery and future policy making were further discussed in the roundtable. For example, under long-term needs, each country or group of countries has to develop its approach to synergies according to its specific needs. Oh, sorry, it was about the delivery. Yeah, each country or group of countries has to develop its approach to synergies according to its specific needs and need to enhance public awareness, information exchange, transfer of knowledge, skills, and experience at the regional and international level, including through South-South cooperation. A need to improve North-South cooperation was also mentioned to prevent the export of hazardous products and end-of-life equipment towards developing countries. The green life cycle approach was also mentioned as one of the key to ministerial cooperation. The synergy approach should have a broad context encompassing other existing and future instruments and programs like Minamata Convention. They also noted the benefits of coordinated chemical and waste units. And again, the importance of industry was mentioned, especially that the electronic waste was identified as an issue of growing concern. The example of international panel on chemicals was raised as a good idea for the way forward and the long-term needs of the synergistic delivery of the 3 conventions. For the future policy making, there was a need for common understanding of hazardous chemicals and wastes, and challenges in mainstreaming was repeated. There's a need to integrate the mandates and functions of the chemicals and waste conventions at the national level, and need more transparent funding mechanisms. As I have indicated earlier, the full report is available on the website, so the link is already provided in the slide here, but this will provide the ministerial outcomes of the high-level segment roundtable discussions. The final part of my presentation is on the follow-up to the meeting. The Secretariat has prepared the follow-up letters that covers the urgent requests like the nomination of experts to participate in some of the small intersessional working groups. Many of those requests was with deadline of 30th of June. So these urgent requests are already included in the follow-up letter, especially for the Basel Convention and the Stockholm Convention. So the parties will receive this letter and it will be available on the website shortly. The report of the meeting is now in preparation. The draft report has been adopted up until the one day before the last day of each convention COPs. The final day of the convention COPs were entrusted to the rapporteur and the Secretariat to prepare, so including all those parts as well as decisions taken by each COP, and also the meeting reports of the ExCOPs are in preparation now. The advanced English it will take about 1 month to prepare and be finalized for publication. The translation will take another about 3 months more after the finalization of the English version of the report. Intersessional working groups that were set up by the Basel Convention are listed in this slide, and also by the Stockholm Convention. There was no intersessional working group set up by the Rotterdam Convention. The election of officers, the names of the officers with country names are indicated in this slide, for Basel Convention COP12 Bureau, the President is from Poland, Andrzej, and also Vice President, as indicated in this list. Then other bodies, the co-chairs of the open-ended working group, vice chairs and rapporteur, the members of the ICC, and the members of ENFORCE. For the Rotterdam Convention, the Bureau for the 7th meeting were identified as indicated in this slide with the President, Mr. Mohamed Hashashne, and the CRC members. The names of the CRC members were also identified during the meeting, and it will be indicated in the report of the meeting. The members from GRULAC, the Antigua and Barbuda, Dominican Republic, Honduras, those 3 countries haven't provided the names of the experts yet, so the Secretariat will be in contact with those countries. The Stockholm COP7 Bureau are also indicated in this slide. It's the President, Ms. Johanna from Sweden, and the Vice President. The parties identified to nominate BOPROC members are indicated in the table in this slide. The names of the experts were provided, except for Ecuador, St. Vincent and Grenadines, and Venezuela. So those 3 countries need to be contacted by the Secretariat for the name of the experts. The slide will be available for all the participants, so you can have a closer look at the list later on. Thank you very much, and I would like to now pass the floor to our colleague. Thank you.